Squaxin Island tribe, upon whose traditional homelands the Evergreen State College Olympia campus is situated. For thousands of years, their ancestral families lived and thrived here. They named Bud Inlet Sechas and Eld Inlet, where the campus is located, Squaatl. Today, the Squaxin Island tribe continues to live on and steward the lands and waters of the southern Salish Sea. We also gratefully acknowledge the Puyallup tribe, whose traditional lands Evergreen's Tacoma campus is located upon. We respect and acknowledge the Squaxin Island and Puyallup tribes and other tribes across the Americas and their many contributions to the Evergreen State College in support of education, tribal sovereignty, environmental stewardship. This acknowledgement is one small step towards respect and collaboration with the aim of uplifting the voices, cultures, and histories of the tribes of these lands and waters. And as many of you are thinking about in your programs, the land acknowledgement is just one step, and we should be thinking about how we can work to do better. So today I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Dr. Alida Cantor, an associate professor of geography at Portland State University. She's a political ecologist with interest in water governance, legal geography, and intersections between water, communities, food, land, energy, and social and environmental justice. So we'll hear a lot about this, specifically connections to renewable energy projects, which many of us probably think of as always a good thing, but I think Dr. Cantor is going to introduce some ideas around that which will complicate things a little bit more and bring in questions of environmental justice. So hopefully this will be a really exciting talk for everybody, and thank you all for being here. Let's welcome Dr. Cantor here.
Can you hear me on this?
Yes.
All right, thanks. Thank you so much, Anthony, for that nice introduction and for having me here. It's really nice to be here at Evergreen. I was thinking as I was pulling in, I think the last time I was here, I was like 20 visiting my buddy who was a student here, and we'd come and like have like vegan picnics and stuff. So anyway, it's nice to be here. So this is one of my research projects right now, but like my main focus, looking at water and renewable energy transitions and how those intersect with environmental justice. So just want to recognize my team. This is not just my work, especially I'm working with a really great team of faculty members, including Kate Berry at University of Nevada, Reno, Dustin Mulvaney at San Jose State, and Jay Blair at Cal Poly Pomona. We have an Indigenous advisory board of folks across the Western U.S., and then a really great team of graduate and undergraduate students as well. And so definitely could not do this work without all these really wonderful people. Okay, so just sort of setting the stage for the problem that we're talking about here. Renewable energy is on the rise. This is something that absolutely needs to happen in order to decarbonize our energy system. So you can see some of these projections into the future, looking at more, especially solar and wind, are expected to grow pretty significantly looking forward. I'm actually going to skip over to it. So the problem with solar and wind is that the sun only shines during the day and the wind blows sometimes and not other times, right? And so that can create these mismatches on the grid where sometimes there's a lot of energy coming in and sometimes there is not. And so if you have like a solar dominated grid, you have like way more power than everybody needs in the middle of the day, unless, everybody comes home and wants to like run their, turn on their lights and run their dishwasher and do some laundry, and all of a sudden there's more draw on the grid than there is power. And so you can see this is like the difference, right, between like what is coming on and what's, so they call this the duck curve. It's a sort of like mismatch between supply and demand that can happen on a solar-dominated grid. So for this research, we're thinking in this sort of supply chain model. And so thinking about the energy transition as not just, I think it can often be thought of as like, as generation of energy, right? So solar power, wind power, those are important parts of a renewable transition, but it goes beyond that and includes this really diverse range of activities. And so when you start thinking about supply chains, you get all of these different geographies that become connected through the supply chains. And so, it can be very far away places that are brought into relationship with one another through energy. And, and when you're thinking about energy transitions, then those supply chains can shift. And so we're, looking at this whole chain. There's, production activities, storage activities, and that's where we're going to focus today a lot on storage because, as I mentioned, with that duck curve problem, and storage is kind of the answer that people are looking to for how to address that problem. But then there's other related, transmission lines are coming up all the time in my work, and I can't ignore them. And issues around EV-based electric vehicle economies, and then end-of-life issues as well. We're starting to look into recycling and disposal of batteries, like what happens to these things when they're done with their useful life. And so all of these things are connected with each other, and like I said, bring different people and places into relationship with each other. So this is just to show you that the duck curve is already happening and it's a thing. And so this is looking at this is the yellow part in the middle there is like when solar this is every day, right? And you can see that every day electricity prices go down in the middle of the day because there's a lot of solar coming online. And so anyway, so looking at how do you even out this pattern a little bit. And so energy storage becomes a big part of that picture. And this is looking at how this dotted line there is how storage can kind of even out the picture. If the energy above that line is then put in so that you can use it later in this purple format during the evenings, you can kind of make use of more of that renewable energy if you have more storage online. Or not online, on the grid is what I mean. So this is starting to get translated into policy. This map has, and we made this a few years ago, so I'm not sure how it's changed, or may have changed even more, but the sort of dark yellow states have some kind of renewable portfolio standard. So those are states that are requiring renewable energy. And then the purple states also have energy storage mandates. And so they're recognizing that, having a renewable standard, like I said, to make use of that energy, incorporating storage. So they're having policy requirements for that. So yeah, it's a lot, right? It's a lot of places that are trying to bring more storage into being. And that involves shifting geographies, right? These are all thinking about these are infrastructure projects with impacts on places. And it's really changing rapidly as we shift to renewables. And so this is just a look at, and sort of the new geography of it is different than the old geography of it in many ways. So the red pluses here are existing pumped storage. And we were just looking at the US West for this particular project, not national, but all of the existing projects in the US are in California. They're mostly on rivers, so it's a pond that exists next to a river, so it's interacting with an active aquatic ecosystem. Most of the proposed projects are not limited to California, right? They're all over the place. A lot of them are what's called closed loop. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but they're basically off the river. So it's sort of just a different set of technologies, a different set of places. This map also has lithium extraction on it. So we've got one active lithium mine currently in Nevada, and then a whole bunch of proposals, and this is growing every day, permit applications and things being put out. Utility scale battery systems, we've got a handful of those. And so anyway, just trying to show sort of the geography of this and how the proposals really outpace what currently exists in a way that really widens the geography of what we're talking about here. And there's a lot of impacts that come along with that, right? A lot of benefits as like I said, we need to decarbonize, but also impacts on land use, habitat, tribal communities and cultural resources, water and hydrosocial impacts, and environmental justice. And so those are all things to think about as part of this transition. So here's just a look at sort of our research logic model. So we're looking at within this life cycle of renewable energy storage, specifically focusing on the storage part, looking at activities across the life cycle of storage. So from extraction of lithium and other critical minerals to manufacturing, to the storage itself, and then recycling, and what are the environmental justice issues and the water issues throughout that life cycle. So that's our overview of our project, what we're doing. So in particular, we're asking for this research how frontline communities are impacted and activated by renewable energy projects. And we're interested in water, so the hydrosocial changes associated with renewable energy, and also the life cycles of renewable energy storage in particular, because I think it's been understudied as opposed to generation or consumption. Looking at how different groups view these changes, especially hydrosocial changes. So I'll talk in a minute about this term hydrosocial imaginaries of how people imagine interactions with water. Environmental justice and how different groups think about EJ issues around energy and how those are handled in practice. And then we're geographically looking at the Western US. So we have a number of case studies that are distributed across the Western US. So some of our sort of theoretical academic angle that we're coming at this, I'm a political ecologist, and so is the rest of my team, I believe. So taking a critical approach to the water energy nexus, there's sort of this, so when we talk about water energy nexus, it was a sort of area of study around how water and energy interact with each other. Initially came about with sort of a lot of modeling literature that didn't engage with very critical questions, and so our work is really taking a more critical approach here. And so that means focusing on the power dynamics involved. Looking at water justice and hydrosocial cycles, so looking at how these projects impact water and how hydrosocial relations, so societal relationships with water are shaped and remade through energy. Looking at just transitions and environmental justice, so who is benefiting and who's bearing the burdens in energy transitions? I think that's a super important question to be asking. And then also this question of metabolism of storage, and so thinking about fossil fuel is one of the reasons it has that it maintains dominance and is so popular is that it's it is really stable. It sits there and for a long time in a pretty small package, and then you light it on fire and it gives energy and does what it's going to do. And renewables, like I said, they're less so this the sunshine sometimes, and not other times. These energy forms are less sort of stable and reliable in the same way that fossil fuels are. So how these materialities of different types of renewable energy technologies require this fix of storage infrastructure that then launches a whole set of infrastructure projects. So diving in a little bit to what this political ecology approach involves when we talk about water energy nexus, looking at local experiences beyond just modeling. So yeah, a lot of the water energy nexus work of yesteryear, previous decades has been how much water does it take to make this much energy? How much energy goes into this much water? And quantifying things. We're interested in the experiences of communities, and in particular the power dynamics and environmental justice issues that go along with them. And then also thinking about this idea of hydrosocial imaginaries. Can I ask, is the term hydrosocial something that you've come across in readings before? Anthony has. I saw maybe a few nods. So it's the idea that when we think about water, we're not just thinking about H2O, right? There's the stuff that's in my water bottle, right? And it's delicious. But it's, how did it get into my water bottle? It came through a system of pipes that is governed by, in this case, the Portland Water Bureau. It came from the Bull Run watershed. It's regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act. It's, there might be economic issues involved in who has good water and who doesn't, right? So there's this whole set of political, economic, legal, technological issues that make it possible for me to have water in my water bottle. And so that's the hydrosocial cycle or hydrosocial framework. And so when we think about hydrosocial imaginaries, we're thinking what are people thinking about when they think about water? How are ideas of water getting leveraged into support or opposition for energy projects? All right, so overall, I'm going to launch into our case studies pretty soon here, but the goal of this research project, we're looking to connect the dots. So there's like all these different projects happening all over, and like every day, if you look in the news, there's like something about a renewable energy project. And so we want to connect the dots between them, and the idea is that there are probably common problems, common lessons we can learn from them. And then even common best practices, like how can we make a renewable energy system that works for people? And as part of that connecting the dots, understanding these hydrosocial imaginaries and different ideas of environmental justice, to develop policy recommendations that are going to minimize the negative environmental justice impacts and the burdens that communities are bearing, and maximize the benefits. And working with communities to do that, to identify those best practices, is a big part of this work. So we're taking kind of a mixed qualitative approach. We're doing interviews with community members, policy folks, project proponents and developers, and then people with overarching expertise. So we're looking at a set of case studies, but then also looking at like people sort of in the like energy sphere more broadly. Reading a lot of environmental impact statements and planning documents and the comments that come in on those. Doing participant observation by attending community events and forums and things like that. Hosting webinars and workshops. We're just about to launch a Q methodology study, which I'm excited about. It's a kind of survey technique where you give people a whole bunch of statements and ask them to sort the statements depending on what they, like by what they agree or disagree most with, and you can kind of get a sense of like groups of perspectives around issues. So I'm very excited about that. It's like ready to go any day now. And then comparative policy analysis around these cases as well. All right, so now we actually get into the interesting stuff, right? The places. So we're looking at a set of case studies along the water energy nexus. And the first four are kind of like our key ones that I'm going to talk more about. So we're looking at several types of lithium mining, including in Thacker Pass, Nevada, and in the Salton Sea area of California. I'm actually going down there tomorrow for a set of meetings on the Salton Sea, which I'm excited about. Looking at Goldendale's proposed pumped hydro project, which I know a number of you have visited and engaged with in different ways. And then looking at a desalination case, which kind of gets us at the water side of the water energy nexus. And then bringing in a couple of other things around energy or battery recycling, and also offshore wind as kind of a tangent that I'm not going to talk about much today, but I have a wonderful master's student who's focusing on offshore wind. All right, so I'm gonna, for each of these cases, give like a bit of an overview of like the technology and what is involved, and then get into the cases themselves. So thinking about lithium, it's a mineral that's gotten a lot of attention lately. I actually was just like 2 days ago in the news. Apparently in North Carolina, there were FEMA agents who had to be evacuated because they were receiving threats because there was a conspiracy theory going on that the FEMA agents were actually trying to seize people's land for lithium extraction. So this is like wild. I was not on my like bingo card of how lithium was going to enter the news this year. But it gets into some of these issues around, tension around like government and extraction, and people's sort of fears around extraction. Anyway, sorry, that's kind of an aside, but lithium's in the news a lot, and the reason is obviously it's the key ingredient for electric vehicle batteries and electronics, and so it's expected that demand for lithium is going to grow quite a lot. This has created this really unstable market with a lot of booms and busts, where there's been like a lot of investment around the world, but also really like unstable prices. But lithium's been designated a critical mineral and linked to national security concerns. There's a lot of like, within like the industry speak, it's like a lot of like fear of China as like the enemy who's like controls lithium, and we the US need to like get out from under China's control by doing it domestically is kind of the narrative. It's not uncommon, but the mining happens where there's enough deposits in one place to make it profitable. Most current mining operations are happening in South America and Australia. Also, some in China, and other rare earth minerals are coming from China as well. But a lot of lithium's coming from South America. There's an area called the Lithium Triangle that they do a lot of brine extraction, which has major impacts on water quality in particular, and indigenous communities through the impacts on water and wetland health. And so it's been a pretty damaging extraction method that has gotten a lot of protests. And then there's new technologies being developed for what's called direct lithium extraction, DLE, that you'll hear about, and I'll talk about that when I get to the Salton Sea. So looking at lithium in the US, there's like a lot of talk and not a lot like of actual on the ground happening right now, or there's a lot happening, but not a lot of actual lithium being produced. So there's one currently operating lithium mine in the US in Nevada, and then there's probably hundreds of proposals and claims, and all you really have to do to like start a claim is like go out to somewhere and like stick a stick in the ground with a sign on it. So like you too could stake a lithium claim if you wanted. But mostly it's not people like you, it's multinational companies from Australia and Canada that are starting exploration and permitting. It definitely has consequences for land and water. A lot of it's being done in sort of remote areas, and so there's folks concerned about the habitat impacts and implications, as well as cultural impacts. And so there's been like, a lot of lithium exploration and a lot of like questioning and resistance going on. So one of the cases we've been looking at is lithium mining in the McDermott caldera. So this is an area that crosses the border of Oregon and Nevada. It's kind of like way out there in Oregon. What's that? Oh yeah, it's like lovely, a lot of sage grouse. The Thacker Pass development has gotten a lot of attention and a lot of, there's been like campouts for a long time and litigation. And meanwhile, there's another set of claims in Oregon that have kind of slid under the radar. So Thacker Pass has raised a lot of concerns, in particular around cultural resources. So some of the opponents of this project have included local tribal governments. There's a Paiute advocacy group called the People of Red Mountain. And then there's been ranching families and environmental justice groups who have kind of allied with these tribal groups to sort of make a coalition of opponents to this mine. Some of the issues include it's a culturally important site to the Paiute, or Burns Paiute folks, as a historic massacre site and a place for culturally important water, medicine, and wildlife. And of course, in a desert ecosystem, like if you start draining water, that's going to impact streams and groundwater-dependent ecosystems in the area. Resistance has included camp-in protests, urban protests, commenting on the environmental impact statements and showing up at meetings, and also like a long string of litigation and sort of trying to block the mine through legal means. And there's also water issues involved. So thinking about some of the water quality concerns, one of the big areas of concern is around transport and use of sulfuric acid. So if there's trucks of sulfuric acid coming in, folks are worried about those spilling or leaking. Groundwater concerns, like I mentioned, and just concerns that the company's going to dig deeper than they say they're going to do. And so some of these, like this idea of competing hydrosocial imaginaries, you have on the one hand, the company is saying that they're going to have zero net water usage and minimal contamination. And then you have like a lot of local folks questioning that the company can manage this whole project with zero water use and no contamination. Like, is that actually possible, or something that's actually going to happen? So one of the alternatives to lithium mining through, I mentioned brine evaporation, like what's happening in South America, and then this is like hard rock mining is what's proposed in Nevada. And one of the alternative methods is called direct lithium extraction. And so this is like supposedly a clean, green way to get lithium without any environmental impacts that will solve all the problems from those other like dirtier forms. So one of the areas where this is proposed right now and like sort of underway is at the Salton Sea, which is in Southern California. So it's like, there's a little map up there, like way down there in the corner. Has anyone been to that area before? Yeah? I did my dissertation research down there. It's like, I was really attracted to it because it's just sort of like a weird place. But it's, the Salton Sea is a complicated ecosystem. It's a human-made lake that continues to exist because of agricultural runoff, but has since become a really important migratory bird flyway. And if it ceases to exist, would have really major air quality and environmental justice implications. So it's this sort of like complicated in limbo ecosystem. And around it are a lot of geothermal facilities. And they're looking at doing this geothermal plus lithium technology that is sort of currently under development, but hasn't yet been, like they've got like pilots going, but no full-scale implementation yet. Anyway, so lithium is proposed as a way to basically like solve all the problems at the Salton Sea. It's a poor area. It's got a lot of environmental justice issues. And the idea is lithium will bring in lots of money, and then they'll be able to solve all the problems. So some of the problems, it's pretty water intensive in a water scarce region. There's been like, since all of this has been proposed, the lithium development, like there's been curtailments of Colorado River water that could impact the viability of these projects. It's like a new water actor in a place where they're trying to use less water. So that's an issue. So the Salton Sea is sort of this longstanding sacrifice zone that's been contaminated for a century by agricultural chemicals, military testing, waste dumping, algal blooms, and dust. And, the idea is lithium will come along and solve all those problems. It's gotten Silicon Valley attention. I think Warren Buffett has invested there, like a lot of sort of like big financial actors coming in. They've like rebranded the area Lithium Valley on the like county commissioner end and trying to like make this thing happen. And then on the community side, there's like this sort of tension between this like desire for economic opportunities and like a better tax base, but also some skepticism that like, is this going to be, is it realistic that this, is Warren Buffett going to come and save all of Imperial Valley from all the problems that exist? And so there's been a lot of efforts to make sure that the benefits and the revenues actually accrue to the region. One of the things that they've done is make like a lithium tax zone around it so that some of the tax money or some of the revenues from lithium will stay local. And then there's questions around that, like who gets to control that money, who decides who actually, like where does that money go, what kind of projects get supported. But they are trying to sort of figure out how to like make this project work for the region if it's going to happen. And I mentioned water uncertainties. So water is like the big elephant in the room at the Salton Sea. It's reliant on Colorado River water, which is, a system under great stress and uncertainty, especially with climate change. And so, this question of like, can you add a new water user into this region and expect that like everybody's going to be okay with that is an open question. There's concerns around water quality as well. Some of the proposals involve things like, well, we're just going to take our toxic materials and put them on a truck and take them to Arizona is like one of the parts of the plan that, there's problems here. So yeah, questions around like what's going to happen to the waste products from this project. And then I mentioned like the community benefit aspect of like how, will those benefits actually accrue to the local community? And then finally, there are concerns over tribal cultural resources near these geothermal developments, and there's several important cultural sites near the Salton Sea that there's concerns about how they might be affected by these. It's like a pretty industrial development process. All right, so that's lithium. Shifting gears a bit to pumped hydropower storage. So this is a non-battery type of energy storage. So thinking back to like that conceptual diagram, right? So you have like batteries that can store energy, and then this is a sort of utility scale, like big energy storage. And the way it works is you basically have like, you've got a pond up here and a pond down here. And when there's a lot of energy on the grid, you pump water up to the high pond. Like you use all that energy to move water up. And then when you want energy, you just like let it fall down. So it's kind of like a contained hydropower system that's like a giant kinetic battery. So it's like, I think, I try to remember, it's like either 70 or maybe 90% of the existing utility scale energy storage in the US is pumped hydropower. Like it's not actually batteries, even though that's like sort of the thing that we interact with most. But these systems can be very big and very, effective at storing a lot of energy. And so the case I've been studying is one that that Sarah Williams' class went and visited last summer, or May, was it? I don't know. The spring, I was supposed to come and visit, and I unfortunately couldn't. But the proposed pumped hydropower storage project in Goldendale, Washington. So this is a closed-loop project, which means it's that both of those ponds are off the river. Like I said earlier, like these things can be connected to a body of water, or they can be disconnected. And I've been learning lately, like from the perspective of like the energy industry and the hydropower industry, those closed loop systems are like sort of perceived as like without any impacts. Like they're supposed to be like the gold standard of like, because they're not attached to a body of water, like they don't impact fish or aquatic ecosystems. And so it's like, these are completely unproblematic and like a perfect solution to our energy problems, is how they're being like framed by the energy industry and the hydropower industry. So this particular project is designed to store 1.2 gigawatts of energy, which is a lot, storage for regional and wind and solar energy. So in the Klickitat County area, there's a ton of wind already, and so like the idea is it's like well located to like plug into existing infrastructure is the argument for it. It's being developed by Rye Development, which is owned by the Danish firm Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. So again, we see a lot of this like international ownership of these projects. And it recently received its water quality certification, and the permitting is still in process. So while the hydropower industry sees these things as like basically perfect, in practice there has been a lot of opposition to this project in particular. And the main opposition has been from the Yakima Nation, which sees this project as coming with unmitigatable impacts on cultural resources, and that construction of this project is a desecration of Pushpum, which is a sacred place. And the environmental impact statement itself says that like the impacts on cultural resources are unmitigatable. It's like they cannot be fixed or dealt with, like they will impact this sacred place. And so that there have been a number of nonprofit groups and enviro groups who have kind of allied with the Yakima Nation and other tribes in opposing this project, which is interesting. Like when I was interviewing some of the folks from environmental organizations, it was like interesting to hear what they were saying. Like, well, like previously, maybe we would have just like gone along with this project because it's a climate project and it's an energy, green energy, but sort of like in the current day, after Black Lives Matter, in the wake of land back movements, like we just cannot support this project because of because of its impacts on local indigenous people. And so that's sort of this like shift in environmental discourse. And there are concerns about water quality and quantity impacts, but like in my read of it, those concerns are sort of secondary to the cultural impacts, and they're being leveraged more because it's like seen as a more like quantifiable way to like you can like put some numbers on those water quality things and take it to policy actors in a way that tribal cultural resources are harder to quantify. So a lot of it I think is about the siting, and so like the technology itself is sort of like I don't know, I see it at least as sort of neutral, and it's about where you put it and what's, the siting, like the impacts of where you put it. And in this case, the particulars of this place, you have to have like a big steep drop for pumped hydro, right? Like there has to be like a place to put an up pond and a down pond and like a steep drop in between to take advantage of that like topography. But that's the same things that make it a sacred place, right? Like that you can like see for a long way and have this like the view, and so like the same places that are amenable to pumped hydro like can be sacred places, like just in their nature. And yeah, mitigation isn't possible. Like you can't just exchange one place for another. So like a lot of the ideas around environmental mitigation in general are like substitute based, right? Like it's like, oh, we'll just like destroy this wetland over here, but that's okay because we'll build one over here. And you can't do that with a sacred site. There's also this idea of cumulative impacts where the same community has been impacted by, land dispossession, dams, had their salmon decimated, like this sort of chipping away over time where the same people are expected to bear the burdens over and over again. And this is just seen as like the latest thing, like continuing that pattern. The licensing process has been done through FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Because it's a hydropower project, it triggers a certain set of regulations. And so they've been doing all this consultation processes and having community meetings and such, but there's sort of a sense that it's not a meaningful project, and the tribes in particular feel like they're being like consulted but not listened to. Like if someone consults with you and asks your permission to do something and you say no, and then they do it anyway, like they could say they consulted, but like they're not actually listening, right? So there's sort of questions around how meaningful is this consultation. And so because of all of these patterns, like there's a sense that green energy in this particular case is the latest form of settler colonial dispossession in this place. All right, I've just got a few more case type things to touch on, and then we'll kind of bring those dots together, and then I'd love to talk with you all and hear your questions and ideas. So another one of my colleagues is looking at utility scale battery storage. And so this is, again, it's another type of energy storage, and this is like what it looks like is a bunch of like boxes on the landscape with the goal of phasing out, especially in this case, natural gas peaker plants. So natural gas is often used to bridge that gap around like when you need more energy at certain types of day, like they just like fire up some natural gas. And so this is, the idea of this is like, can we reduce that? However, some of the issues around they can catch on fire and they can explode. So that's a problem and has major air quality and water quality concerns, and like the people who live around those areas are highly concerned. So the case we're looking at is a battery energy system in Moss Landing, California, which there's these two near each other that together are the largest battery energy system in the world. And they're replacing a retired natural gas plant, and it is resulting in practice in fewer air pollution emissions in a low-income and environmental justice community. However, there was a fire in 2021 that resulted in a 12-hour shelter in place, and just major air and water quality hazards that can be associated with these events. And so it did result in some like emergency planning efforts. But, again, sort of these like very localized costs and burdens around air and water quality and hazards. Okay, so I'm gonna take a step back and try to draw it all together here. So we're seeing, renewable energy transitions need to happen. We need decarbonization, and we need it yesterday. At the same time, there are localized changes and impacts that are happening as a result associated with renewable energy transitions. And so those include hydrosocial change, so impacts around water quality, water quantity, groundwater ecosystems, and people's relationships with water. There's these different hydrosocial imaginaries at play. So there's sort of different ways of thinking about water that are changing, right? So, and trade-offs, water for energy, agriculture, housing, ecosystems, how do we balance all those things? There's legacy impacts to water coming into play, so there's past histories of areas with dams, agriculture, military, et cetera, that like shape how they interact with and think about their water. And just different understandings and values and visions for water and land coming into conflict with one another. These different impacts are at different scales, right? So at like the big scale, like yes, renewable energy transitions contribute to decarbonization and help mitigate climate change, and that's, benefits everybody. At the same time, at a local scale, these activities can harm communities and create localized burdens and negative impacts. And there's this question of like specific places and specific waters that hold value, right? Like water isn't just like a global thing that's all interchangeable. Like if I ask you to close your eyes and like think about a water that's meaningful to you, you're gonna think about like a specific place, right? Some place that you've interacted with and that holds, meaning in your heart, and isn't, like if you just said like, well, we'll get rid of that, but we'll build something over here, like it's not the same. And then you have these volatile global markets and international finance that are coming into the picture and impacting local communities and ecosystems. In particular, in every single one of these cases, there's issues around Indigenous environmental justice and Indigenous communities. Impacts to water, first foods, cultural resources, places with spiritual and cultural importance are, like every one of these cases is impacting Indigenous communities in some way. Often, like one of the themes we're seeing is that tribal communities are not engaged early enough in development, like it's after the plan has been made, after the site has been chosen, then they're asked and with no real meaningful way to say no, which makes for the tokenistic consultation processes. And so, like I said, this means that renewable energy can be the latest form of settler colonialism. Overall, though, like I caveat that with saying that not all community members are on the same page in like any one of these cases, right? Like there's going to be different opinions. It's high stakes. Communities can be divided around these issues, but part of that is that like we are seeing community members demanding accountability and meaningful impact and more concrete benefits. Like a phrase you'll hear in like especially like industry side of things is social license to operate. So like when a mining company wants to come put a new mine, like what they're looking for from the local community is what they call social license to operate. So kind of like general permission to like what they do is okay. And so I recently heard someone say, they're like, we need to recognize that social license to operate has a cost or has a value, and that value might need to be paid in like monetary terms to the communities. It's like, oh yeah, like this value that they're looking for of permission to operate like is, something that communities should actually be like getting a benefit for. Along those lines, like the opponents to specific projects are usually not like anti-green energy in general. Like they are also recognizing that like decarbonization needs to happen. Many are frontline communities that are also impacted by climate change itself, right? Which is like a tough spot to be in, to be like impacted by climate change and also impacted by the things that are supposed to solve climate change. And so it just makes it like, I don't know, just a little messy, and it's not like straightforward, but many of the same groups are involved in fighting climate change and fighting fossil fuels. I'm seeing some instances though where like opposition to these specific projects is being muddled with climate denialism and sort of anti-federal government sentiments. Like I mentioned that like FEMA agents being driven out because people think they're going to take their land for lithium. There's been like an offshore wind, similar dynamics of sort of like, like white supremacist groups like tapping into the opposition to wind. And so it gets like very messy and like not very straightforward. So thinking about just like big picture, right, like taking a step back, like why this matters, and it really does matter, because I see there's sort of like in the sphere, these are not like climate denialists, these are like within people who like believe that climate change is real and are passionate about solving it, right? There's sort of these two perspectives, and there were these two articles that came out last winter, that kind of summed it up really well, I thought. So on the one hand, this is Sammy Roth from the LA Times, who's a climate writer and columnist who writes a lot of really great things. But this one like really like got me a little angry. So he put out this solving climate change will have side effects. Get over it. And he's like, well, like ideally like everything would be super clean and wouldn't impact anybody, and like every desert tortoise would be special and saved. But we don't live in that world, so everybody just needs to get over it because climate change is really bad and we need to solve it right now. So like, that's that. Like you all with your local concerns should just like suck it up and move on. So the response to it came from this other author, Ketan Joshi, who came out with sort of a response that said, nature and people shouldn't be designated losers in the energy transition. And his argument was that, yes, we need speed, but we also need to maintain speed. And if you're telling people to get over it, they might be less likely to get on board with your projects. And, so that maybe like slowing down and taking the time to work with communities is worth it if you want a sustained, long-lasting transition. So to that end, I think this is like one of my last like real wordy slides here, and we can chat about it all. One of the things that we're doing in this project is asking like, how can energy transitions avoid sacrificing local communities? So we could like recognize these patterns that are happening that are like not great, that we would like to do better, or like to see being done better. So one of these is that the starting principle really should be free, prior, and informed consent. This is like an international standard that's been implemented all over the world. The idea that communities should have the right to know what is going on with projects and the right to say no. And there should be community involvement, not after the decisions have been made, but in the early stages. Thinking holistically about demand is another piece that, especially in my interviews of frontline communities around these projects, they're like, well, why aren't the people in cities having to deal with this themselves? It's like, well, good question, like we should all be. So, thinking about it not just as that we need to like continue to, like imagine a line going like this and that we have to meet that demand, but like how can we like tackle the demand side as well? One of my favorite examples is thinking about mobility transitions, not just swapping one-for-one EVs with gas-powered vehicles for EVs. Like, what if we, took that lithium and invested it in like e-bikes and electric buses? We could move more people with less lithium. And then another question is about who owns the projects is another way that we can do this better. So tribal ownership, other community-based ownership of renewable projects could, if the tribes are in charge of siting it in the first place, they can choose sites that are less problematic from the beginning. And to that end, I guess the Yakama Nation right now is working on basically a same idea as the pumped hydropower, but with like a train full of rocks, basically, instead. So it's like, can we move something heavy that's not water uphill and let it go down and make energy without risking water resources? And that's like led by the Yakama Nation. So I think projects like that are a really great example of how to do this better. Community benefit agreements are another sort of promising avenue, and it's one that me and my research team are working with the Climate and Community Institute right now to do a report on this. And so these are agreements between companies and communities to try to like quantify some of that social license to operate, basically. And it can include revenue sharing, co-ownership, or community input into projects, at the very least sort of employment and infrastructure things, but like it just makes sure that some of those benefits actually accrue to communities and that like, these international firms don't just sort of like scrape everything out and leave. And so, trying to sort of look at some of these policy responses that can support all of these things. So that's where we're at. This is all work in progress. We have developed a story map and a lesson plan for teaching that includes these case studies. We're continuing our case study research, like I said, implementing that Q methodology survey. We're working on the community benefit agreement research and working on policy recommendations. So this is all sort of in progress and continuing to move forward and has been a lot of fun to work on. So I'll end it there, again, acknowledging my team, and would love to hear your thoughts and questions and talk with you all. So thank you. They told me that your questions should get picked up by the mics floating in the air, so.
So feel free to just raise your hand and then we'll sort of hopefully be picked up.
Yeah, so I guess I was very curious about the first part of the presentation in lithium. This might just be my misunderstanding, but I'm curious, is lithium like a dangerous material? Why do we dispose of batteries the way we do? If it's like non-toxic, or like, would it be a problem for the people working with it? I just have a lot of questions about how lithium works.
Yeah, good question. I think there's two issues with disposal of lithium batteries. Like, why do they have to go in like a separate thing? One is fires. So they're like prone to catching fire, and if you just sort of like threw them in the garbage and then they like catch fire, they can like, light everything on fire around them. And then another one is like that it is like kind of a toxic material. Like it's, it's used as in pharmaceuticals, right? Like lithium is an antidepressant, and that's because it like interacts with our brain chemistry. So it like, and like the neurological systems of living beings. And so it's definitely not something you want to just sort of like have out there. As far as battery recycling, we're working with a community group right now that's trying to implement a community right-to-know provisions around a new battery recycling facility. This is in Nevada. And one of the things they're also concerned about is PFAS, polyfluoroalkylated substances. Like it's that like pretty toxic endocrine disruptor that in battery recycling, I guess, can also like come up as a problem. So, does that answer? Okay, thanks. Yeah, good question.
I guess you kind of covered this on like your later slides and stuff, like by like talking about solutions and stuff. But like, how do you remain hopeful that we can figure this all out? Because it seems like there's so many problems happening at once. It's hard to just like pick a lane and just have an anchor.
Totally. That's a really good question. I think like there are so many community groups who are like doing really good work to make sure that their communities like are not just like bulldozed over. And that's really exciting to see. And like they are like this group that's working on the community right to know provisions around the battery recycling facility. Like they're a group that's like fully supportive of circular economies and sees recycling as an opportunity to minimize mining, right? And they're saying like, okay, let's make sure our community knows what this is doing to our water and that we have all the data and information and that, the company is held responsible for any damage to water, right? So it can be like let's do these things right in a non-damaging way. And then, like I said, like they can go further and have more momentum. So I do think, I think it's like, I don't know, it's hard because, there are cases where it's just like, not everybody's going to be happy, but I do think there are ways to like do this better, and hopefully we can like point to some of those. Mm-hmm.
I have two questions. One, as for the brine water mining, can you use salt water for that? Why would they have to draw from? Why do they need fresh water for that?
So the lithium brine extraction method, what they're doing is pumping groundwater for that. And then they have like a series of ponds that become like increasingly more concentrated as it evaporates. And the groundwater, like these sort of like briny groundwater, is just like where the lithium is concentrated. And I don't know if the same concentrations are in seawater. It's mostly like lithium tends to be concentrated in like desert areas just because of like geology, I guess. But so yeah, it's like in the like desert areas of like Chile and Argentina is where they're like pumping groundwater. But then, it's like you can imagine like sucking groundwater over here, it's gonna like lower the groundwater table somewhere else. And so that's impacting wetlands and the species that count on those wetlands.
What are your thoughts on the future of nuclear energy?
Oh man, I've like tried hard not to engage with that. I don't know. I'm not sure I have like very coherent thoughts on that. I'd have to like think a little bit more about it. Thanks. Mm-hmm.
What first like sparked your interest, or like what caused you to focus so specifically on like these energy solutions and like looking into like hydrosocial impacts and things like that? It seems to me like a really something that would be easy to just not know even existed as a field of study.
Yeah, thanks. Let's see. I'm actually like pretty new to thinking about energy. I came into this as like a water person. And I came into water as like a food systems person, actually, like kind of going back. So I like started in like college and grad school being interested in sustainable agriculture, and then kind of like went down this rabbit hole where it's like, oh, agriculture needs water and irrigation, and like, thinking about the politics of irrigation, and got kind of, down this rabbit hole of like political ecology of water governance. And then started noticing that all of these water conflicts were popping up that were actually energy conflicts, like, thinking about lithium as a water conflict, like the groups in South America that are most protesting the lithium mining there are like using the like water is life as like an umbrella to protest it, right? Or like the pumped hydropower facility, it's like a water project, but it's actually an energy project. And so, kind of like tracking whatever rabbit hole felt interesting, I guess. And that's where I'm at now, and I don't know what'll come next. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What advantages do you feel that you had in doing this research as a geographer? And I guess why is geography such a cool interdisciplinary discipline that students love places to devote their lives to?
Oh, what a great question. Thank you. Let's see. Geography has always, I majored in geography as an I know y'all don't have majors, but anyway, I chose it because it let me take like political science and sociology classes and like biology and ecology type classes at the same time and like bring them into conversation with each other. And so I do really like geography is this like lovely interdisciplinary field of study that lets you think about the social and physical aspects of problems together, as long as it's about place, right, is what makes it geography. And so like in all of these cases are very place-based problems, right? And so I think geography is a great lens to think about them through because it's like centering place, and then it's like what is happening in those places and people's interactions with those places. And so, it's sort of like taking place as the starting point and going from there. And so I think that's a great starting point to study any number of cultural and environmental issues, and, sort of the messy entanglements of human and environmental systems that are happening all over the place. So, thank you. Yeah, y'all should be geographers. It's great.
So, given that these are very specific locations and local and finite resources, if an attempt were made to increase local and indigenous management and ownership of these sites, do you think they would have a chance to compete against some of these multinational corporations or even local companies that have many more resources in these communities? I mean, how likely do you think that is to work out well?
That's a great question. I think there's two things come to mind as like strategies, or not a strategy, but like ways that this can happen. One is like community ownership, right, of projects. Like I mentioned, like the Yakama Nation's like kinetic energy project, and I think that those are like largely a matter of like public investment can make a big difference. And so like the Department of Energy is currently investing like millions of dollars into tribal energy systems and community-based energy systems. And like that is something that like at a federal level, like money is being put there. At the same time, there's like millions with an M going to like tribal energy projects. And then at the same time, there's like billions with a B going into like Lithium America's got like $2 billion from the Department of Energy. So there's like sort of these scalar differences. And so I think that's one thing that could be helpful is just to like shovel money at, like we're already shoveling money into energy transitions, like putting it to like community-owned projects could make a difference. And then another part of that, I think, is the community benefit agreements. And so that, like one way of thinking about those is like a way of like realizing community power, basically, right? And like the community is like withholding their social license to operate until they're seeing enough concrete benefits that it is like something that they feel okay with. And so like I think that well-crafted community benefit agreements could be another way to like, you know, like if they're going to be owned by corporations, like making sure that those corporations aren't just like, you know, scraping everything they can and leaving.
When there are lawsuits, they tend to last decades.
Yeah, that's and that actually is a really like powerful argument for things like community benefit agreements. Like when you're like, if you want to like make the case to companies that it's worthwhile to do meaningful engagement with communities, because the alternative is like a decade of lawsuits, right? And so, like that's like an argument that actually gets through to companies is like, they're like, why should we do this? It's like, well, you know, you can work with the community for a year and develop something, you know, and like, you know, dedicate a portion of your revenue to it, or you can be mired up in lawsuits for 10 years and maybe get the project approved in the end and maybe not. And so like that lawsuit, you know, threat is like something that like I think speaks in like corporate language about the like why you should do meaningful engagement with communities. Mm-hmm.
You were saying like some of the projects are going at stuff like this in non-critical ways, and like you and other people are trying to come at it in more critical ways. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, thank you. So one thing I mean by that is thinking always about power at the center of it, right? And like these questions around who is benefiting at whose expense. And so, you know, like you could look at like a desalination plant and say like, well, it's using like this many megawatts of energy to make this many gallons of water. Like, is that a good trade-off? You know, but like that, you know, just sort of like quantifying it. And then you could say like, who is benefiting from, you know, who is making money off of that project, who is feeling the impacts, and those are just like different sets of questions to ask. So by like critical, I usually mean like power engaged questions, which often comes to political economy, but can come to things like sovereignty and rights and you know, other forms of social power. Does that help answer that?
My other question is, like, because so many, like, there are a lot of really large areas of, like, sacred lands of so many different tribes, and it seems like a lot of them happen to be where resources are also. And so, like, do you see a way of, you know, of course, respecting the land and respecting the wishes of the tribes, but still, you know, getting the resources that people need?
I mean, I guess I see like tribal sovereignty and ownership as like the ultimate, like kind of the only way that like if the tribe is in charge of picking whether it happens, where it happens, and how it happens, and is like receiving the benefits from it, you know, then like if the tribal government can like make those and the community can make those decisions for themselves without it being like a developer coming in and making those decisions for them, I think that that's probably going to have better outcomes. The problem is, so there's like, let's see, sorry, let me back up a minute. So Goldendale, shortly, like I think it was this last summer, there were 3 pumped hydropower projects that were rejected and not given their licenses on Navajo Nation land. And that was because FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, like basically the tribe had not given their consent for these projects to happen. And FERC passed a new rule that said that you can't build projects on tribal land without tribal consent, which is like absolutely basic and like kind of horrifying that like that was a law that was just, or not, or a rule that was just recently put into effect, right? Like you think that's kind of a no-brainer that you don't build a project on tribal lands without tribal consent. But anyway, so they rejected those licenses for that. But a project like Goldendale is not on tribal land, right? It's on lands that are like important and sacred, but they're not reservation lands. They're not owned by the tribe. They're under like tribal treaty rights, but not like the property ownership boundaries like don't put them there. So so there's like cases like those Navajo Nation cases where that rule is like helpful, but then other cases like Goldendale where it is not. And so yeah, I think projects like what the Yakama Nation is doing to like build their own energy systems the way that they want are probably like the most promising thing that I see.
The Goldendale one is still on sacred land?
Yeah, so it's lands that are like, you know, if you think of like the minimal land that has been like delineated as reservation lands for tribes, right? But, you know, previous to that, you know, reservation lands, like, you know, there's lots of lands that were and are considered sacred, right, that are not like falling within the boundaries of those reservations. And so that is like a particularly, like a site that has particular cultural value, even though it doesn't fall within the boundaries of what's like, you know, granted from the federal government to the tribe.
Given that we have both of you in the room, and Anthony spoke to a program yesterday, and the student that asked this question that many of us were slightly disturbed by, are you willing to re-ask the question and see what happens in a conversation between Alida and Anthony, Karen?
I don't remember how I worded it exactly, but it was something about, give me a hint. I can't remember how I said it.
So one response could be, how can we hold corporations, as I heard you yesterday, more responsible? How can they do it better? How can we have a better greenwash of green energy? That might have been one way you asked the question.
Where's the responsibility for efficiency in their systems versus like putting it onto populace, and where's the agency for us in that?
And the moment that was stunning as I heard it was Anthony in some ways didn't answer the question at all. Anthony said, do we need that energy for those purposes?
Yeah.
And I would love to, we ran out of class time, I would love to hear the two of you comment on what forms of energy do we actually need for what purposes?
Totally. I mean, this is like data centers and AI, like, are what pop into my mind immediately, right? And like this, is that like what you were talking, like, and I just read the other day that like Google hooked up like a nuclear reactor directly to like, they're like, let's just like bypass the grid and we'll just have our own nuclear energy running our AI systems. And yeah, it's just, and I know like with the offshore wind in Oregon, like hearing communities talk about this has like come up a lot of like, you know, are we just like sacrificing our resources to build this thing that's just gonna like, you know, like how do y'all want to use this energy? Like, is it worth the sacrificing of our systems to like, fuel data centers and AI?
How would this play into a resource-based economy as opposed to just infinite and exponential growth of energy demand? They're creating a real estate bubble is what we were talking about, buying up land to create these data centers and the ways to recycle, store, but do we need it? Do we actually need that much energy that fast? And who's to say? Who's got the data?
Do we need?
Here, I'm going to give you
No,
my
no, I don't.
That's a really good question. I mean,
Not me.
yeah, I feel like just,
I guess I'm
keeping
just
that question in
invite
mind.
everybody to think, do you need AI to generate stories for you? Do you need AI to write papers for you? These are questions that we're struggling with right now at Evergreen, right? Do we need to build billions of dollars of infrastructure and energy infrastructure so that AI can replace humans in the workplace? I don't know. There's lots of questions that are moral and ethical rather than just about energy and resources, but obviously it comes down to that too. That's kind of what I was getting at yesterday, and I'm sorry it was kind of like I was dodging the question.
It spun the narrative of what they're telling us we need as opposed to what we're able to identify for ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, and in like a lot of ways, like efficiency is like has improved wildly, right? Like on all kinds of ways, like like even just like our light bulbs, like like I had like an old light bulb in my house that I discovered lately and changed out, and it was like hot, right? Because it's like just like wasting, and then you look at it, it's like, oh, this one light bulb is like all the rest of the light bulbs in my whole house combined, right? So like just like our basic energy efficiency technologies like have actually come a long way. Same with water, honestly, like in a lot of like cities like LA and Las Vegas, in like drought prone, like dry places, like they've managed to increase their population like over the years and like basically stay flat on water because of water use like efficiency. And then you introduce like data centers and AI, and you just like have this whole new like user of all those efficiency gains, and it's a bummer.
I think on similar topic, also, if AIs can write these papers for us and these things and these ideas, what is the point of us having written them in the first place? Like, why are we writing them if it doesn't need our input into them?
Well, and they're not writing, right? They're like stealing your all's ideas in the first place, right? Like the content comes from somewhere, like they're scraping what already exists and like rearranging it, right? And like there have been, issues around like people's books being used as trainers for AI, right? And it's like, well, that's like, like AI doesn't make this stuff up. It makes it up out of what like humanity has put into it. Anyway, sorry, that's like a bit of an aside. I was on a like social media group of academic moms the other day. There was some mom who asked, they're like, hey, this is a really great like life hack. I am using AI to write bedtime stories for my children and read the bedtime stories to my children. And then like immediately like 17 people jumped on that and were like, AI is a massive use of energy and water resources, and like also like, like there's a million children's book authors who have written lovely stories that you could read to your children yourself. And like, do we need AI to do that? So anyway, sorry, it's like a bit of a, yeah.
Well, first, for the record, don't have AI write your papers. It's wildly inaccurate. Just put that out there. But has Yakima referred to treaty rights, Treaty Walla Walla, to stand up against this project? And why hasn't it maybe figured more? Is it because the Bolt decision is more about fisheries and natural resources, and this is more about sacred sites and burials that are up on the Columbia Hills? Is that, in other words, is treaty rights kind of weak when it comes to sacred sites in this case?
Yeah, I mean, yes, definitely, like, treaty rights are being referred to. There was, like, a letter, like, written by the Yakima Nation and signed by, like, 17 other local tribes to Governor Inslee, like, calling on, centering tribal treaty rights. And, yeah, I don't know if it's just, like, it's, like, squishier than, like, some of the other, like, more quantifiable things that go into an environmental impact statement. But they have, in this environmental impact statement, it says like there will be unmitigatable damage to cultural resources, but that is like not considered like a thing to deny a permit on. And it's like, well, there's like Clean Water Act, and so if like it pollutes water above a certain, there can be like these other things that have sort of more like quantifiability, I guess, or maybe could deny a permit on, but like. Yeah, you spent like all this time out there recently. Do you have any?
We also learned that it was complicated because the Yakima tribe is a confederated tribe of multiple groups, and that some of the areas for which the sacred land issues and the foraging issues either are or aren't identified with the Yakima Nation and that confederated tribe agreements. And that was some multiple rabbit holes that were really complicated and really interesting because there's historical contestation over who fishes where, and the salmon that already don't exist because the dam was put in. So it was wonderfully complicated.
And I think paired with like reluctance to like put all the data out there, I think is I think there would be like reluctance to like in a sort of like a site suitability map, like here's a map of all of our sacred sites so you can avoid developing them, right? Would be something that like tribal governments might be hesitant to publish because that's like private and important data to them. So issues around like data sovereignty as well. Are we running out of time, Anthony?
Maybe time for like one or two more questions.
Yeah, I was going gonna ask if you knew anything about like who gives the legislation for the massive like servers that they're dumping in the ocean, or if there's any ecological impact behind that, or if that's not been studied yet.
Wait, are you talking about data servers or?
Data servers, and then also like the new AI servers that they're building like even bigger and dumping.
That'll be a question for Anthony. I don't know a lot about.
Aware of dumping like the
No,
e-waste
they're
in the
just like,
oceans, or?
they're putting it in the ocean to cool it.
Oh, yeah.
And
They use rivers to do that too.
I mean, like, temperature is regulated under the Clean Water Act, including oceans, if it's within a certain number of miles from the coast. And so, yeah, I mean, anything that like involves temperature pollution would be a Clean Water Act like thing. But I don't know. But yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something that I just noticed you bring up a few times throughout the course of this whole thing. Isn't there a sort of danger, I guess, in putting so much emphasis on the individual impacts of each person rather than focusing the attention on those who are causing the most impact? And so, like, it is sort of a way to divert responsibility away from those who are doing the most damage and not having anything done about it, versus like, oh, you should get an electric car because you'll have less of an impact on the environment, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's a thing that like even with this whole area of research like gives me hesitation sometimes, or like I think about this sometimes. It's like that like the fossil fuel industry is like if like some of this stuff is like really bad, the fossil fuel industry is like really 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 bad, right? And I don't mean to like be being like diverting attention from that fact. But at the same time, it's like, if we're going to build this new stuff, like, can we build it in a way that doesn't like replicate these harmful patterns? And I do think, I do hope to point more to like policy solution. Like my message to all of you is definitely not like, go get an electric vehicle and like, consider yourself absolved. Like these are structural issues and they require policy and structural solutions. Absolutely. So yeah, thank you for like letting me make that clear.
Mm-hmm. Has the recent gutting of the EPA or the new legislation passed by the Supreme Court affected your research in any way?
Not yet, but no, actually, I think that's the Sackett decision, that one, so that's the Clean Water Act jurisdiction decision that limits like what counts as like the waters of the United States. It's like limits it a lot, and I think that's going to have implications in especially places like Nevada that have a lot of water that is like not connected to bigger waters, or like a lot of like they have like seasonal ponds and like desert lands, and like a lot of areas of like deserty places are going to be like not under the jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act. So that's major, and that's something that like I worry about a lot. And then like the Chevron decision, I don't feel like I have given that enough thought to be able to say yet like exactly how it's going to play out, but it's a good question and definitely something to pay attention to.
All right, let's thank Dr. Cantor for joining us. I just wanted to make a couple of quick announcements. So there'll be another lecture. It's going to be a panel of local climate professionals in week 7. This will be right after the elections. And they'll be talking about sort of local climate action. So I encourage you all to come and learn more about like how you can get involved locally with what the government is doing in terms of planning. And then also be on the lookout for other events that CCAS is doing. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, maybe some questions for Dr. Cantor as well. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you all so much.